Good morning, everyone. Today is Sunday, the 7th day of the month of ER. It's also the 26th day of the month of April, and we are back to study the book, The Art of Giving, and we are now on page 42 of this book, and we are in the midst of discussing some pretty esoteric stuff. I just want to point out that the author of this essay is the third Rebbe of Chabad. Third Rebbe of Chabad passed away. This year will be 150 years ago. Passed away. So he lived basically 200 years ago, which is quite a long time ago. And the book where this is taken from is a book that he wrote in his youth, in his teenage years. He was in his teenage years. He got married when he was a teenager, like everybody did those days. And I mean a young teenager. And at that time, he was already in the midst of writing this book, which covers many of the commandments, many of the mitzvahs of the Torah, and explained in a Hasidic / Kabbalistic manner. And so therefore, the two things. First of all, these are sort of musings rather than a book that he was giving out. Second of all, the standards of Hasidism in his day, we need to take it for granted, were much greater and deeper. That means he didn't have to write it sort of in a more down-to-earth kind of way. He took it for granted that the people who read it would have understood what he was saying. And so therefore, it does come across as somewhat removed, and I've done a lot of speaking rather than learning the text. I know I do that all the time. My mouth doesn't stop talking. But we've done very short bursts of text, and that is because the text takes for granted that you know what's going on. And quite frankly, not everybody does. So therefore, I've spent a longer time. If it feels like we're plodding through this and we're not quite getting through everything, that is correct. That is a correct feeling. Okay, so in the last few weeks, I'm going to do not disturb, if you don't mind. Do not disturb for the next hour. There we go.
Oh, you got it. I got my mini glasses. There's me too, like you out too.
Okay. And so, among different explanations, we're trying to talk about tzedakah here. And the Rebbe went off to... And the Rebbe went off on the verse which begins the portion of Chaye Sarah. That is the fifth Torah portion. And the story was that Abraham and Sarah had a miraculous baby, she at the age of 90, he at the age of 100. There was a bris, and then God tells Abraham, go take your son and offer him as an offering to me on one of the mountains. That's called the binding of Isaac. He takes him, he binds him up on the altar, and then God says, don't do that. This was just a test. And immediately thereafter, the portion ends, and the next portion begins, and Sarah lived a certain amount of time, and she died. Before she dies, though, the second verse is, and Sarah dies. In the first verse, it says, and the days of Sarah, the life of Sarah was 100 years, 20 years, 7 years. This was the years of Sarah, the years of the life of Sarah. And saying that is a strange way of putting things, even in the Torah. The Torah can sometimes use different kind of language. This is a language that it doesn't use anywhere else. That she was 100 years and 20 years and 7 years. Just say 127 We'll get the point. And then it repeats again, these were the years of the life of Sarah. And so he began by talking about why does the Torah have to separate the hundreds from the 20s, from the single digits, from the sevens. And he went into explaining that the sevens represent the 7 characteristics, emotions, the 7 levels within the person. Those are the 7 levels of the structure that God has to bring energy into this world. So each of the worlds which funnel God's energy and filter it so it should be able to arrive at the next lower world are comprised of 10 levels. 3 of them are intellectual, and the 7 of them are characteristics, emotional more. And the characteristics are all, and God goes and creates us in the same way. Gives us 7 characteristics, plus 3 levels of intellect. And then we have higher, deeper elements within us. Not just intellect, but there are things that supersede intellect, like willpower, desire, pleasure. They go higher than intellect, deeper than intellect within the person. And so the single digits are 7, and 7, of course, is the right number. The double digits, the 20 years, that refers to the 2 main intellectual levels, wisdom and understanding. Wisdom is nothing without understanding. It just remains closed, bottled up. Understanding is nothing without wisdom. You can understand stupid things, and that doesn't take wisdom. You need wisdom and understanding. In the words of the Kabbalah, these are 2 friends that don't part. That's why they are 20. They're together, not separated. And that's why they are 10 times more than the single digits. It's in the tens because intellect is so much deeper and so much more influential within the person than the single digits. Then you have the hundreds. She lived 120 and 7. The 100 represents deeper levels in intellect. And he specified desire, will, desire, and pleasure they go deeper within the person. So the hundreds represent that which is beyond even intellect, the deepest annals of a person. That was the number, the explanation of the numbers. Then there was the explanation of the name Sarah. The name of Sarah. The name of Sarah. When you have to be punished by sitting close to the teacher now. the name, when I taught in school, the 7th graders came into class, and they all just sat them. So I had already made a list based on things that I heard about these students, who I want closer, who can I leave in the back. The good students always were in the back because I don't have to worry about them.
Right.
To keep an eye on them. So they would come in, and of course the not so good students would be all the way in the back, and I would wait till everybody sat down, and there's some meek student had to go all the way to the front. Can I sit here? I said, it's okay, you can sit. Then I said, excuse me now, everybody please rise and go to the back of the room. There's a list sitting there. You sit exactly where you are assigned. All right, so the name Sarah was a name that was given to her in her later years. Her original name was Sarai. And Sarai means my princess. And when she got married to Abraham, that made a lot of sense. God said, you're not his princess, you're everyone's princess. Sarah is the one that is a princess for everyone. And so therefore her name was changed to Sarah, which means the princess, in control. And that's why the woman is compared to the lowest level of Malchut. Malchut means kingship, royalty, like a queen. And that's why the Shabbos, the 7th day of the week, is considered the Shabbos queen we hear about. It's a feminine level, the feminine aspect of godliness. That's Sarah. The Hey also represents that H at the end of the letter, at the end of the word, originally had a Yai, Saraya, Yud. Now it was changed to a Hey. A Hey is a letter that has this way, that way, and this way. It has all dimensions to it, basically saying it's in control. And that is the lowest level. The lowest level of the 7 is a level of self-control, self-reflection, self-control. You got to the bottom of the level. Now you've got the whole energy. You've got the whole energy. Where are you going with this? And that's the feminine aspect, because the female is built. One of the fundamental differences between a male and a female is that the female takes the energy and produces the next level, the next generation. So that's the name Sarah that follows the 1 and 20 and 7, a representation of a complete level, a wholesome level. Okay, and that's basically where we finished on the bottom of 43. Now we're going to read the last paragraph of 43 again, just to put us into the context, so we can continue on page 44. Sorry, on page 42 in the English. We did go into a great length. Last week we hardly learned any of the text. We went into great length of this. When the sages say don't read it this way, read it that way, how the sages are not telling us not to read the Torah in its regular way, or to change something in the Torah. What they're saying to us is, look at the Torah, and the Torah is alluding to so many different things. Remember now, the Torah was given by God letter by letter. This is not some man-made document that some have just chosen to believe in. This has been with us since Moses wrote it. Yes, Moses wrote the physical letters, but he was dictated by God, letter by letter. That means that when he wrote a word that was actually physically missing something, there are plenty of words in the Torah that miss a letter or that have an extra letter to them. There are plenty of words in the Torah that they're not plenty, but some words in the Torah that the entire word is read, but written differently. There are a few of those. Every single one of those was not written by not decided by Moses. Moses was told by God precisely how to write it. He was just a scribe. And the Torah says so. The Torah itself says so. If it wouldn't have happened this way, the Jews who complained bitterly about everything would have complained about that as well. I mean, what are you giving us, a document that you decided? They would have complained. They complained about the bread, they complained about the meat, they complained about the water, they complained about everything, traveling. They complained everything. And the Torah isn't ashamed to share that with us. They were a bunch of complainers. So they would have complained about a lot of things. When the Torah says that God appeared to you at Sinai, and to every single one of you, and this is what happened, and that's what happened, somebody would have written another book and said, excuse me, but nothing like this ever happened. Or you're trying to force yourselves onto us, you're trying to tell us stories that never happened. If millions of people were there, you can't fool millions of people. So the Torah has in it the words that were given to the people who experienced it. And that's been with us ever since, and there's never been less than that amount of Jews in this world, and it's never changed. If you go back 2,000-3,000 years, every single letter is like that. Why? Because we look at the Torah as a divine document, and therefore every single letter in there is written the way God wants it to be written. The question is, why did he write it this way? I was sitting here last week with a couple of guests from Israel, and one of them said, could you explain to me the Talmud? And I said, well, he says, I want I want something deeper, I want something more. We got about halfway through. He said, okay, that's enough. And that was about the walls of a sukkah. That the walls of a sukkah can be only three. We build over here 3 walls. Mel builds 3 walls over here. But there is a 4th wall, and that's the wall of the house, of the garages. That's also a wall. You may have a sukkah that's only open to 3. In fact, even the 3rd can be less than a complete wall. And that's perfectly okay. How do we know this? And I'm not going to get into this now, because it'll take a long time just to explain it, and then you might go away with less explanation than this. It'll take a while. But the bottom line is that in the Torah, the word sukkos, which means sukkahs, it's a plural for sukkahs, is written, the entire Torah, you have that word 4 times. 2 times it's written the way it should be written, the way you would expect it to be written, which would be sukkos, os, that o, that which is a vav, vowel, is in there. And 2 times it's missing the vav. It's missing that vowel. Now again, I'm not going to go into this, how you learn from here, whatever. But it's because the Torah, when it writes the same word 4 times, 2 times it writes it one way, and the other 2 times it writes it another way, you can't just say, oh, Moses made a mistake, or he didn't have enough ink, or he was in a rush, or whatever. That's not the way the Torah is looked at. If that's the way the Torah is looked at, then Jewish tradition is meaningless. And that, we know, can't happen. Torah is divine for so many reasons. That's how we look at it. That's how we live with it. And the Talmud goes through it. It's very clear by the time you finish with it. But we learn things just from a lack of a couple of letters. And those letters are vowels. From there we see we need 3 walls. I cannot get into the technical side of it. It's just very complicated. It is complicated. And I'll admit to that. There are plenty of stuff that's very complicated. That's very complicated. But we learn a law about a practice that we have till today, just from the way the Torah is written, which answers the question that we discussed last week. Why doesn't God, if God has all this Talmud and all this oral Torah, just put it in. Why don't you just write it into the book and we'll know what to do? Tell us that you want us to keep Shabbos this way, and you want us to keep the Passover that way, and you want us to have a sukkah that way, and you want to put on tefillin this way. Why give us all these little tidbits over here and then go figure it out? And there are several answers to that. But one of the very practical answers is because then the Torah would be as big as the Talmud. And then you would not want it. You wouldn't feel that you're close to it. You wouldn't feel that you can master it. Now, there are brilliant people who can tell you every single word of the Talmud. Those are very few. But there are quite a few people who can tell you every single word of the Torah. That document you could do. That's not as hard. That's nowhere near as hard. Because you read it and you learn it. You live with it. So the Torah is 100% divine, and we don't change it. I went through this last week in great length, and I can't repeat it about the spoons that gave birth to another spoon, and all the things that we discussed last week. But and catch it on the recording if you need it, if that interests you. But we went through this in great length. We spent maybe a half hour on this last week. The bottom line is that when the sages say, and we're going to learn this right now, when the sages say, the Torah says this, but read it this way. Don't read it this way, read it that way. They're not telling you to go change anything in the Torah. They're not telling you that you shouldn't read the Torah the way it is written originally. What they're saying is, look deeper down. There's something alluded to here. And this is the verse that we're going to learn in a second in the 5th book of the Torah, the book of Deuteronomy, in the 3rd portion, where in the 5th reading of the 3rd portion, if you want to know the exact place, and it says over there that Moses is talking to the Jewish people. He's giving his sermon before he's dying. He's giving his long lecture. That's the word Deuteronomy means words, and these were the words that he was sharing with the people. He began this 5 weeks before he died. And it took him 5 weeks to go through that whole book, and he dies at the end of the Torah, at the end of the 5th book. What does he say? He says a bunch of things. He reminds them of stuff, good things, and he reminds them of not good things. He reminds them of complaints that they had. Then at the end of the reminding, going through, it takes 2.5 portions, he says, now Jews, va'ata Yisrael, and now you Jews, what is God asking of you? All he wants from you is to fear him. fearing doesn't mean to be afraid of him, but it means to be in awe of him, to recognize that he's always here and he's constantly watching you. If you knew that God was in this room, you would behave yourself. I would behave myself. We would all. There would never be anything bad. If we were aware that God is constantly there, there would never be anything bad going on. Because when there's a human being here, when there is a great human being, we are more careful in how we conduct ourselves and the words that we choose to say, in the behavior that we choose to do. I have a very dear a family friend in Atlanta. And these hot days in the summer, she would call me and she would say, "Sorry, Rabbi, I can't come in now." I said, "Why? What's wrong?" She says, "I'm not dressed appropriately." I said, "If you're not dressed appropriately, then why did you get dressed this way?" She says, "No, appropriately to come to your house." Like, I don't know what she was wearing because I never went out to find out what's inappropriate in her eyes or not. But I was, taken aback a little bit the first time it happened, and I was trying to figure out. Somebody told me once, this movie is inappropriate for children, and I said, if it's inappropriate for children, it's inappropriate for adults. Why are adults more appropriate to watch things that children shouldn't watch? If it's gore and blood and guts spilling all over the place, someone's brain starts spilling out of his head, why shouldn't an adult? Why is that appropriate for an adult? Or whatever else there may be. Why should an adult be more appropriate? Why is it more appropriate for an adult to see that? Anyway, so these are people that behave differently, I guess, when they want to come into the rabbi's house. We once had a cleaner lady that came dressed quite loosely. Mm-hmm. And that about a week or two after she started, Mrs. Lou said to her, "This is a house that we have we dress in a certain way, and people come to expect to see that here. And therefore, we didn't tell her out of respect, but we told her that this is we want it to be a little bit more appropriate, respectful. I don't know whatever word you use. Why? Because we represent the Torah lifestyle here. So therefore, there are certain areas where you would be more careful. You walk into a synagogue, you wouldn't walk the way you walked into in your golf cart on the way to Kroger or something. That's how people should be dressed to a shul. There should be a recognition. That's why we wear this whole uniform. You see me here Shabbos morning, I'm sitting like this, and all of a sudden I walk in, I'm wearing this long black thing, the black belt that I have on me, why? Because you're walking to a synagogue, you start to pray. So we don't pray the same way that we eat our food and we do. It's a difference. You're coming to anyway. I'm sure you get the idea. When you go to a wedding and you go to, God forbid, a funeral, you dress differently than when you're walking down the street for a casual discussion with your neighbor. So when Moses says to the Jewish people, "What does God want from me?" He wants you to fear Him. It doesn't mean to fear. It means to be in reverence, to be in awe, just as if He's here. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, one of the greatest Talmudic sages ever, among great Talmudic sages, before he died, his students came to say farewell. And he said to them, he was crying. They said, "Why are you crying?" He says, "Because I'm not unsure which way I'm going to head off." He was 120 years old, and he was dying. And he said, "I don't know where they're going to be taking me." This is a man who was holy, sacred, one of the greatest. And really what he was saying was, if you don't follow the way I taught you to follow, then it comes back at me. And so, because I was responsible for your education, if you will. And then he said, "You should know, I'm asking of you to just wherever you go, to be cognizant, to be aware that the fear of God, the awe of God that you have should be at least as much as you would have from a human being. If a fellow human being was in the room, you would not do what you would do if the fellow human being wasn't in the room. This is not a rabbi, not anything, just a fellow human being. You may not do something, choose to do something that person. You wouldn't drink from the carton if somebody else was there, although you may do it if someone else is not there. My grandfather, a very proper Englishman, would say, the definition of a mensch. How do you describe a mensch? So he says the custom is that when you give around, so today it doesn't exist, this kind of thing in most homes, but when you pass around the cheese, let's say, and you want people to spread it, you don't take the cheese and spread it on your bread. You take the cheese and you put it on the bread plate. Then you spread it, because who wants your crumbs? That's etiquette. He says that's etiquette. The definition of a mensch is a person who does it even when someone else isn't at the same table.
That's right.
Anyway, so that was his, So the bottom line is that when God says, all I want of you is to fear me, to have awe of me, to have reverence of me, it means he wants you to behave yourself, wants us to behave ourselves even when no one is watching, because he is always watching. That's what Moses is saying. But the way he presents it, though, is says, all God is asking of you is this. Oh yeah, as if it's that easy. And that's what the Talmud says. What do you think? That's easy to constantly be aware of God? Again, if we would do that, the whole world would be great. So the Talmud answers, yes. To Moses, relative to Moses, it was an easy thing. He was what's the word? Checked in. He was plugged in all the time. So for him, it was 24/7. It was anything I could do more for God. He was constantly aware of that. So the Rebbe in the Tanya, and the first Rebbe writes in his Tanya, he says, but wait a minute, Moses wasn't talking to himself. Moses was talking to the people. And so he says that really, in every single Jew, there is a little bit of Moses in us. And what Moses is saying was, get in touch with that Moses level that is always plugged in, that soul level that always is connected to God. That's your Moses level. When you get to that, then it should be easy, or it shouldn't be that difficult to dig in to our deeper, more spiritual elements that are within us, our soul elements that are within us. That's the verse. Now, come along the sages in the Talmud, and they say that word, what, ma, what is God asking of you, is ma, mem, hey, ma. M-A-H. Ma. Don't read it as ma, M-A-H, but as me-ah. Add an E before the ah. Me-ah. Me-ah means 100. So now let's read the verse again. Now, what is God asking of you? Not what is God, but now 100 is what God is asking of you. Now, does this mean that the sages are saying the Torah is missing a letter? No. What they're saying is, look at the words. This is a little bit of a strange verse. What does Moses ask? What does God want from you? All he wants is this. And see that the verse is also, in addition to telling us the story, it's also alluding to something else, 100. And it's later more clear in the Psalms where David also tells the people to ask for 100. There was a big plague. 100 people were dying every day. And David came to realize from divine instruction that the 100 was based on the people who were not aware of God. And being unaware of God means that they weren't making enough blessings in the day to bring God. The word blessing, bracha, is to draw down. And when we make a blessing, we draw down the energy of God. Every time we make a blessing, take a cup of water, a cup of tea, and a cup of coffee, and we say, blessed are you, God. We're drawing down energy in ourselves. It's an excuse to bring energy to ourselves. And when we pray 3 times a day, that's exactly what we're doing. We're trying to get plugged in and to bring that energy down to ourselves. That's the prayer. And so therefore, the 100 blessings are a whole day long exercise in drawing godliness, in introducing godliness into this world, even into when we're talking about just some water and some tea. into a mundane, simple activity of eating, or you hear thunder and you see lightning, you make blessings of all those things, and so on. All right, now, having said that, now let's look at the paragraph again. The last paragraph on page 42. This explains the teaching. Do not read what, ma, but rather 100, me'ah. Reciting 100 blessings every day stimulates 100 elicitations and blessings from Soviv Kol Almin into Memale Kol Almin. Memale Kol Almin means he fills all worlds. Soviv Kol Almin, he surrounds all worlds. And these are Kabbalistic terms in reference to two different energies from God. One energy is just the general energy that's here, that's already in this world. The way God created this world, that every single thing has its own energy. A cat has this energy, and a piece of rice has that energy, and a human being has this energy, and whatever. Then there is the higher energy that's not in this world, that you want to draw it into the world. That's the surrounding energy. In other words, it's not in, it's out there. You got to go and drag it in, draw it down. So he wants the Sovev energy, the surrounding energy, to come into the Mamale energy, to come into the energy that's already here, that's filling all the world, and that way you are plugged in all the time. It's not just the regular nature, the way a person is. This corresponds to eliciting the life of Sarah. In other words, from the aforementioned concealed and hidden level of 100 representing an all-encompassing, higher, deeper energy, to the extent that the radiation of Malchut, the lowest level, will reach the lower worlds. You want the higher energy to bring a drawing down of godliness, so that it should reach the next level on a higher note. So that's what the verse means when it says, and Sarah lived, Sarah already, and she lived 100 years and 20 years and 7 years. This is the life of Sarah, meaning that the energy has to come down all the way into this world, for the higher level of energy, that 100 level, that level that supersedes the world, to be brought down into the world. Okay? That's where we finished last week, page 44. While the 100 blessings are able to affect the flow into Malchut. Malchut, again, is the lowest of the 7 levels, the feminine level, the feminine aspect, the lowest of the level, but the beginning of the next level. That enables the next generation to come. So while the 100 blessings are able to affect the flow into Malchut from the level of 100, that means you've got a complete unit over here, even what supersedes the regular. So although that is the case, that through blessings one draws down that kind of energy, nevertheless the Torah, which is rooted in the holy myriads is 10,000, and it's a number. There's no number in Hebrew that is higher than 10,000. The word million that's used in modern day Hebrew is the same word it would be the same behavior as calling a bus an autobus in Hebrew. Or T is te, that kind of thing. They've adopted many words into Hebrew, into the modern day Hebrew, that are really English, mainly English. Some kind, every once in a while you may have a word. So the purists in Israel try very hard to find words somewhere, because if you look in the 3 different books of the Torah and the prophets and the scriptures, you're going to find every single kind of description, and they try to find biblical words that somehow fit into. But the word for refrigerator, for example, is fridge. I'm sorry, the word for freezer is freezer. They don't have a word for freezer. And so on. Anyway, so the numbers in Hebrew, in the original Hebrew, 10,000 is the highest number. And so when you want to say lots and lots and lots, you just use the word revava, which is 10,000. Then that can mean myriad. It means as many as many. So in the final portion of the Torah, Moses starts by saying, this is the blessing, the Torah starts by saying, the narrative says, and this is the blessing that Moses gave to the Jewish people before he dies. And he says, God came from Sinai, and he shined from Seir, another location where Esau was. He appeared from Mount Paran, and he came from the myriads of holiness. That word, myriads of holiness. And this is a reference. The first thing he talks about is God came from all these places. It came to Sinai. It came from Sinai, from all these places. What's all these places? So we've discussed this before. God came to the other nations first, and he asked them if they would want the Torah. So it's coming from Seir, coming from here, coming from there. This is where the sages based their idea that this was an offering to all the nations, and each one of them declined to receive the Torah. They said, what does it say in there? What? Don't murder? Not for me. And let's move on. We can't take this. And the Jews, he came to the Jews and they said, God said to do it. We'll do it. So he describes the holy myriads. What's myriads? How many is myriads? It can only be 10,000. The number can only encompass 10,000. So the Torah is associated not with 100, but with 10,000. That's what he's saying here. The Torah, which is rooted in the holy myriads, elicits divine energy from 10,000, not from 100, but from 10,000. The aforementioned level of chafetz and ratzon, a level far beyond that of 100. Chafetz means desire, ratzon means will. And we've talked about this at length before. When a person wants something, when I have a will to do something, I can't say, my right eye wants it, but my left eye doesn't want it. That's not, then you don't want anything. You can't want something and only part of you wants it. Then you don't really want it. When you have a will, you have a power. It's willpower. You just barge through whatever it is in your way, you're going to do it. Where there's a will, there's a way. We're going to get it done. That's will. Will is a power that says, I want to do it, and I don't care what happens, I'm doing it. So I might be sad, I may be in a bad mood, my stomach is hurting me, my head is hurting me, I'm going into work. But you're in a bad mood. I know, but I'm still going to work. Why? Because I want to, because I need to, because I feel I have to. And so doesn't matter what's going on around me right now, I have to go to work. Because if I don't go to work, I won't, whatever. So it might not make sense to go to work, but I have to go. Because I have to. Because I have a will to do it. I'm going to buy this house. What do you mean? I'm going to marry this woman. I want it, and I'm going to fight for it. I'm going to work for it, and I'm going to get it. Are you sure you want to marry this woman? My right hand is not sure about it. What are you talking about? It doesn't work that way. Will is a power that's encompassing, it's everywhere. So that's will, and that goes deeper than any kind of 100 and anything like that. And then desire is the same idea. Desire doesn't work with a power, though. Desire means I just have this desire. Now you may say, because I have this desire, I have a will. But the desire is more a quieter, it's my desire to,
More internal.
It's an internal right. It stays within the person. And the ultimate, deepest, quietest level within us, but it touches our very core, is what we call pleasure. And pleasure is not the same with everyone. What gives you pleasure might not give me pleasure. For you, listening to this music may give you the biggest, most pleasure you can have. And to me, listen to the music. But if I ate that a piece of cake, and some people say, "Well, eating cake? Are you crazy? I go to the Bahamas. Now that is pleasure." I think if everyone has a different way of experiencing the pleasure, that's one thing about pleasure. Another thing about pleasure is you can't have it all the time. If you had it all the time, it wouldn't be pleasure; it would be routine. So pleasure is elusive. Pleasure is only momentary, or whatever. It's only in a certain amount of time. And nothing can get in the way. If it rained one day and it ruined your party, even though you may have had 6 days, it's missing. Something is missing. You don't feel it's complete. Pleasure is very, very sensitive. Why? Because it touches that most inner core within the person. It's very personal and it's very internal, the deepest part of the person.
But it's not as strong as the will. It's
not a power. There's no strength to it. It is what you are really all about. It touches the essential person, the essence of the person. So you can't have it. If a power is aggression, you got to get out, you got to do it, you got to push it, you got to force it. Pleasure is no force. Pleasure is just simply, I'm relaxed. I'm in a different world. I'm so happy to be with this person, or to be with that in that place, or to eat that food, or to think these thoughts, or to listen to this music, or to get to this performance, or whatever. Whatever gives a person pleasure. But there's no pushing. There's no force. And yes, it is letting go. It's getting in touch with the deepest elements of the person. And another thing, the deepest part of the person that's affected by pleasure, it has to be wholesome, it has to be complete, and you can't you have to let it sort of come to you. You're not going to say, "Oh, let me get some pleasure now." It doesn't work that way. It's sort of, when you finish with whatever you're involved with after a week in your favorite place with your favorite people, whatever, then all of a sudden you say, "Oh, that was amazing! I just come back and I feel like I've been elevated to a whole different,
Right.
Because it's the deepest part of the person. Everything we do ultimately is towards that goal. I make money so I can have pleasure. I eat so I can live and I can have pleasure. It's all about the pleasure. So let's see this again. Let's go over this paragraph again. While the 100 blessings are able to affect the flow into Malchut from the level of 100, so we get the high level of 100, the Torah, which is rooted in the holy myriads, elicits divine energy from 10,000, which is the aforementioned level of Chafetz and Ratzon, desire and will, a level far beyond that of 100. This divine energy can then descend via Malchut, via the lowest level of any world, into this world and permeate physical things such as a sukkah and tefillin and so on. Let's look at footnote number 60. Just as the 100 blessings elicit the level of 100, Torah study is capable of eliciting from the highest level, that of 10,000, because of its lofty source, because the Torah is a divine, absolute, every single word there is divine, every letter. This higher spiritual energy elicited by Torah study can even permeate physical matter and transform it into a spiritual object. A Sefer Torah, our most sacred and most holy of objects that are possible in this world, is made out of simple skin of an animal. Skin of an animal, some wood to hold on, and ink that's made out of tree bark. And they make the ink today the same way it was made during Moses' time. You don't buy this ink in the store. This ink is handmade by the scribes. And they make it with charcoal. They take a mirror and they put a fire to it, and it produces a black soot. And some tree business, there's 3 or 4 ingredients that go into that. That's the way ink is made, the way the Talmud describes to be made. And they use a feather, a quill, not a fountain pen. It's written the exact same way Moses wrote it, with the exact same ingredients that Moses made that ink. On parchment, the way it was made during Moses' time as well. Nothing has changed in the Torah. And that is our most sacred object. Animal skin. Animals. You got a cow out in the field. Moo. That's your Torah. That's pretty amazing if you think about it. That's the most sacred object. How is that possible? I understand the sukkah. Mel builds a sukkah, it's holy. But the Torah, and the answer is because God chose to bring his divine energy into this world and use the most lofty energy to the most mundane or even lowest levels. So you got minerals, you got some tree bark, you got some wood, you got some animals, and it's all in the Torah. And that we kiss it, we revere it, we treat it like a human being. When the Torah is written and it comes into a synagogue, there's a parade, literally, and dancing, like a wedding, and then there's a big meal. This happens every single place that you do a new Torah. And if a Torah, God forbid, is damaged or a fire comes and burns it, it's not repairable. There's a funeral, literally. In a box, people gather and go to a cemetery. It's a funeral. Skin of an animal. It's because it comes from the highest level, from God.
How long does it take to make it?
To make, you mean to write it or to produce the whole thing?
To write a Torah.
To write a Torah, remember now, the scribe has to painstakingly write every single letter. And how many letters are in the Torah? Anybody know?
613.
Letters? That's on one page. There are 304,800 and I think it's 800 and something. 304,000 letters. Each one of them has to be written by hand separately. So and it's a human being, your back has to, every once in a while you got to sit back up. And
if you make a mistake?
And if you make a mistake, you can, one thing about the Torah, different than the tefillin and the mezuzah. Tefillin and mezuzah, you make a mistake, bye-bye. But the Torah can be erased and replaced. You could do that with the Torah. Or if there's a mistake that can't be repaired, let's say in God's name, you can't erase it. So the Torah comes in
Columns.
In sections. Each section has 3 to 5 or 6 columns on the section. So you can remove the section and replace it with a different section. That's okay. So the Torah has more leniency, funnily enough, than a tefillin and a mezuzah, although the Torah is considered the most sacred because it has the message in it of the entire message. So it takes approximately, if you push it, and it's not good to push it because you need to have concentration on every letter. If you make one mistake, it's a problem. So if you push it, it could take 6-7 months. But that's pushing it. It's regularly for one person to write a whole Torah. That's all he's doing all day. It'll take at least 9 months, probably a year. So
More than one person write it?
yes, because it comes in sections. Although that may be a little funny because each person's handwriting, although it's the same letters and you have to learn to make those letters, they're still somewhat different. And someone like me, who reads the Torah all the time, I've been reading the Torah since my bar mitzvah. I've been laning, I've been officiating by reading from the Torah. Not everybody, it's a skill that you have to really work and learn. And so that I can tell I'm sensitive to the different differences in letters, and sometimes it gets annoying because the letters are not as clear and as crisp, and you can sometimes make them when you're reading fast, like I do over here. I read it fast over here because it would take a longer time, and people would start complaining. Where's the food? Whatever. So I read it a little faster over here, and also people haven't yet gotten used to Torah reading. We hardly ever have Torah reading here. We are more focused on the praying part of it at this stage. It's a learning curve for all of us. So I read it fast, but if you read it, regular speed, if you're reading regular speed, then you could sort of figure it out. But when you're reading, I'm not concentrating on every single word. I read it. It's committed. It's in my memory. I do prepare it, but I know these things already. So I'm not really focusing. I'm letting it come to me. And sometimes when the letters are not as clear, you sort of get lost in them, and it gets frustrating for me. So yes, you can have 2 different people, 3 different people, as many people as you want, writing different sections. This one writes the first book, this one writes the 5th book. But the letters can be different. So you prefer to have one style throughout the Torah. Anyway, so the Torah which takes a year to write. It's all animals and minerals, and that is our most sacred object. And that is the whole focus. The focus is to take from this mundane physical world and make it holy, make it sacred, make it special. And then this is what God wants us to do. This is our mission on this world. What is sacred already, it doesn't necessarily need our help. God wants us, we are partners in creation, to look after this world so that we can elevate this world. And we elevate this world by several ways. One of the ways is when we eat kosher food, and when we make blessings on the food, and when we have a mezuzah, also skin of an animal on your wall, and you have your Torah scroll, and you put on the tefillin, and the Shabbos. These are the things that elevate even the physical world. Only once a year are we asked to refrain from any physical activity and get into the synagogue and spend all day long in the shul, wear white, and just be removed. That's once a year. But that once a year is enough. It's in this week's portion, by the way, about Yom Kippur. But that should be enough for the rest of the year. The rest of the year is not about sitting in the synagogue and locking yourselves away for a day. But it's about eating matzah, and about eating in the sukkah, and about making a blessing, and eating kosher food, and whatever. All right. This concludes the interpretation of the verse, and he came with some of the holy myriad. Okay, so now let's look at footnote 61. Summary of first concept. There are 5 levels of spirituality, each of which corresponds to a set numerical value, a set of numerical values. In terms of the sefirot, that is the mechanism with which God sends energy into this world, they reflect 5 groups of divine attributes: emotive, midot, which is the emotions, the characteristics; intellectual, mochin, meaning brain; transcendent, lamaila mesechel, above seichel, above intellect; desire, which is ratzon. Actually, it's wrong. Desire is chefetz, not ratzon. And then pleasure is ta'anug. So we have emotions, intellect, that which is above intellect, desire, and pleasure. In terms of the soul, these levels correspond to the 5 soul levels of nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, and yechida in ascending order. There are 5 different ways that the scriptures or the sages refer to the soul. One of them is nefesh. Nefesh is the first time we meet a human being. God said, and even animals, they have a nefesh. A nefesh is the simple, lowest level of soul, the level of life, the blood, the living that we do, and the general activity of living, which is eating, sleeping, and so forth. That's the level of living, nefesh. Then the next level is ruach, and that nefesh corresponds to our physical activities. Ruach is the spirit. Hey, I'm going to get ruach for Shabbos. Ruach means it's going to be spirit in the room. Spirit is something that's more spiritual. Spirit. And that spirit is connected to our emotions, which is the spirit of the person. This one's kind, this one's happy, this one's sad, this one's compassionate, this one's humble. It takes different people to have the ruach in the world. Then there is neshama. We've heard of neshama. Neshama means a soul. It also means breath. It means a deeper element of life. That refers to our intellect. And then there's chaya. Chaya means living, life, alive. That's something that's not in an individual place. A life is everywhere. Everything is alive within us. And so chaya represents that encompassing level, that will, that desire. And then yechida means singular. That's the deepest element within us. That's the pleasure level within the person. Those are the 5 descriptions, the way to describe the soul. And these words are used in several places throughout the 24 written books of our Torah's prophets and scriptures.
Could you say the last again? Yechida?
Yechida.
Yechida.
Yechida means like individual. The individuality of each person. It's the essence.
One.
Yes.
Yechida.
Yachid means in single, individual. Individual. It's the individuality of the person. There is one more part to this that we'll continue on with next week. There's one more. He says this concludes it. Then he says, "Oh, by the way, there's like a little footnote at the end of it, which he continues on over here, which we'll get to next week."